Hello and welcome to another episode of Everything Digital Health. I'm Marcus Bohr. I'm a GP and health tech specialist, and today I'm welcoming Joe McDonald, who is the father of the digital health networks. He is a prolific publisher of editorial pieces and has brought these editorial pieces all together into a master tome volume called FHIR and Loathing in Las Vegas. Joe is a consultant psychiatrist and a clinical informatician, and I'll hand over to him to tell us about his new book.
Well, thanks for that, Marcus. I've cheated in terms of writing a book. I've always wanted to write a book, and I have to say it's immensely satisfying to hold a book in your hand where you wrote everything in it. It is inspired by Fred Brooks's The Mythical Man Month, published in the 1970s,
I got a copy.
which was the collected essays on software development. And I thought if Fred Brooks, who got a law named after him, can collect his essays together and write a book, I thought, well, how many words have I written over the years? And most of what I've written was written for at the behest of John Herxmer of Digital Health. And they've recently changed hands. And I thought, oh, shit, what if they just delete all my old stuff that I've written over 15, 20 years experience of health IT? And I was worried that it was all going to disappear. And my legacy would just be a page not available error. So my immortality was at risk. So I've got it all together and put it in a book. And last few weeks, I've learned quite a lot about self-publishing, the pitfalls of self-publishing, and about how to do things and how not to do things. One of the things that you shouldn't do if you want to sell lots of books is you shouldn't have an obscure title like FHIR and Loathing in Las Vegas. You should have called it 20 Years in Health IT by Joe McDonald. But you live and learn, because obviously nobody can find the book unless they know about it, unless they know you. But as it happens, I'm really happy with it, because it's 400 people have bought it, which is just astonishing. I couldn't, when you get a little dashboard of stats from Amazon, because I'd like to say no trees were unnecessarily harmed in the making of this book, because it's published on demand, so the book doesn't exist until you buy it. But
so
I've been absolutely.
The book, that's the point at which they harm the tree.
That's it. But of course, you can just download it. If you've got a Kindle subscription, it's free. And if you just want to download it, it's $5.99. So, and that's what most people do. Obviously, they haven't got this glorious hardback with this fabulous cover that I designed myself with the help of, you can probably guess, ChatGPT.
Yes.
And if you get a close look at it, the prompt I used was, give me an evil politician being controlled by a mega corporation in the health IT world. And it's given me Farage.
It basically
look at him.
Given you Farage, yeah.
It's giving me Farage being controlled by shadowy puppets. So I was,
he's not a politician, though. He's just a grifter.
Yeah.
Sadly, sounds like he's probably going to be the next prime minister. Let's hope I'm wrong.
Well,
we look this.
Well, I think we both know that we both hope that you're wrong about that. But the bookies think he's the next prime minister, and it's well scary. And some of what's in the book actually is overtly political, and so it's very interesting. Some of my very early essays, from 12, 15 years ago, I'm stunned by my own ignorance and my own naivety about what's going on in the health IT marketplace. And by the end, frankly, I am much more worldly wise. One of the later chapters is about regulatory capture. and how our industry has been largely captured by very few players, and we are now in the hands of a tiny number of very rich people who control the NHS IT scene. I'm very worried that in the deal that was done with Trump during his last royal visit, is likely to have handed even more of the NHS software marketplace to the Americans, who frankly aren't very good at it, and certainly do not have the best interests of the NHS at heart. So it's quite a journey from start to finish in the book, and I do hope that the people who bought it, amazingly, because I expected to sell one maybe, because it was really for me. I do hope that people get something out of my journey, from naive, oh, let's just try a little bit harder with Lorenzo, in chapter 1, to the end where, frankly, I've concluded that we just don't know what we're doing. That we've spent billions on software, clinical software, and we've missed the entire point. It's software. There are no titanium heat shields. There are no plutonium batteries. It's not a nuclear-powered, aircraft carrier or a space program. It shouldn't cost billions. It's and you're an idiot if you're paying billions for software, and yet we have.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's definitely, we are overpaying for all the software. And I think a lot of that comes from the outsourcing and outsourcing and outsourcing and outsourcing. So there might be, dozens of layers of outsourcing when you really get to the bottom of it, before you actually find someone who's got their hands on a keyboard writing code. Because when you get, if you get Oracle or Palantir to do something, they will have subcontractors within their organization, and you follow it all the way down, and the value is being stripped out at every layer by shareholders and by people who are earning money for doing nothing. They're just making money through shareholding. The people who actually deliver the value at the very end have been, they'll be on 15 quid an hour via Upwork or something like that. At the very end of the chain, they'll be in some kind of middle income country that trying to scrape a living as a developer.
I think that's true, but there are hints that you might be buying overpriced software. I think if you look very carefully at your suppliers, for example, does your supplier have, let's say, a Formula One team, maybe, or perhaps the chief executive of your supplier has a personal jumbo jet 747? Then these are all clues, I think, that you might be getting taken to the cleaners and overpaying for software. And that's the other thing about clinical software over the last 20 years. All the other software has got cheaper / free because it's software, right? You don't even have to pay for the floppy disks now. You just copy it across. When I first started, when I got my job as a national clinical lead for IT, brackets mental health, during the national program, I got it because I've designed a website. I've built a one-page website with Microsoft front page, which came on a disk, and it cost £400. The same software is now given away free if you buy a $1.99 domain name from GoDaddy. So all the other software's got cheaper. Ours keeps getting more expensive. How is that?
And it's not even that good, is it? Because if you think about the things that the big EHR sort of suppliers have sidestepped, for example, most of those EHRs really are medical devices. They should be medical devices, but none of them are registered as a medical device. The medical device legislation has kind of come in the foreground whilst the EHRs were already in place, and they have decided for themselves as manufacturers that they don't really want to be regarded as medical device manufacturers, so they haven't bothered. But certainly, I mean, if the system has an error in it that prescribes a medication incorrectly and the patient is harmed, then it's a medical device. It has fulfilled the functions of a medical device in that it's a critical part of patient care. And we've got some clinical safety legislation in the UK, but I think because it's UK only, I'm talking about the DCB 0129 sort of clinical safety stuff. It's UK only. And so as we've got as the players that are involved in the NHS have got bigger, they've kind of just said, well, we'll do you a clinical safety case, but we won't really act on it. It's not going to be a robust attempt to iron out clinical safety problems. It's just a piece of paper that we'll wave at you so that you can procure us.
And we're largely, we're a pimple on the behind of the US EHR market. So consequently, they're not all that interested in adapting to our needs. And, it's just beyond me why, when we have one of the most vibrant electronic patient record marketplaces in the world, we've allowed it to develop into this, oligopoly of a handful of the super rich deciding what happens. And, we're going to have very little sovereignty, I suspect, over NHS data in the next, in fairly short order. I think we're in real difficulty of being a vassal from a software development point of view. And, what was a vibrant British marketplace is increasingly being given away to Donald Trump and his chums. What did we get in return?
Yeah, well, there are lots of risks to that we haven't even really fully appreciated, I don't think. I mean, we've talked about data sovereignty and where the data is in a literal sense, and the fact that if it's an American corporation that owns the data, then American Secret Service can demand to see the data, even if the data center is in the EU, for example. If it's owned by Microsoft, for example, or owned by Epic, they can still appropriate that data using their laws. But it goes a bit further than that. Now, there's a new twist, which is not long ago, a couple of weeks ago, I saw a story that Donald Trump had intervened to prevent birth control being sent to Belgium. So there was a company that was involved in selling, I think it was contraceptive pills, and they intervened in that deal. And so essentially this is now right-wing fundamental Christianity bigotry, which has become part of government in the American, in America. And now because of Trump too, this is reaching into policy decisions about what companies can and can't do. So can American companies sell things that the conservative American right don't agree with? What happens when that starts to affect the software? So will we start to see a chilling effect on that software, say, an American EHR being allowed to be used in, for example, a transgender clinic, or even a sexual health clinic, or a termination of pregnancy clinic? Because that's when it's easy to dismiss that as a little bit too far-fetched of a conspiracy thing. And a few weeks ago, I would have said you were right. And then I've just, you see this thing where they are actually involving themselves in what their companies can and can't do. So you've got to prepare yourself for the fact that, there is a very fickle government in charge of that whole country. And if they decide that they don't want a piece of American software being used for a certain use, they'll ban it, and they'll just put a massive export tariff on it or something like that.
Yeah, so we need to have a sensible strategy about making sure that at some level, in the same way that we got dependent on Russian gas, we're now almost entirely dependent on American software. And, in a government, cards on the table, I'm a card-carrying member of the Labour Party. In a government that's supposedly going for growth, why are we handing off an entire industry, clinical software, to a government upon whom we cannot rely? and it just seems insane. I know Public Digital have published one or two things about the need to rethink digital sovereignty, and I fully support that, because I genuinely think. I mean, the book's called Fire and Loathing in Las Vegas, and the Vegas reference is two things. It's a reference to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson, who was the kind of journalist who called this sort of thing out. But it's also a reference to the sheer madness of that novel, and the fact that some of the stuff that we're doing is bonkers. And that really became apparent to me when I went to HIMSS, the great big health,
In Las
um,
Vegas.
it, the great big conference in Las Vegas, and then you can see how much money is sloshing about in the American software industry. When you go onto the Epic stand and the pile on the carpet is up over the welts of your boots, you know, people back in the day were, that everybody was queuing up to take out health service staff and IT people for a $400 steak. Well, I didn't even know you get a $400 steak. Um, you know, the amount of money sloshing about there, and somehow we've ended up with a great deal of American software. I'm sure the steaks and the drinks have nothing to do with it, but you do
Yeah.
need to go to HIMSS and just see it one time, just how much money. I mean, the first time I went, there were 72,000 delegates there, all paying $1,000. That's a $7 million conference. That's just the tickets to get in. Uh, God knows what the major system suppliers are paying to sponsor it and to get access to
Stand.
customers. I mean, I went to HIMSS this year, actually, back to Vegas again, and it was a little bit smaller. But I tell you what isn't happening anymore. English people aren't getting invited to $400 steak dinners because our market is already full, and so they're not really interested in us. I suspect they're whining and dining people from other countries now.
Yeah. I like the idea that nothing makes sense in health tech until you start to see, until the scales fall from your eyes and you see that it is actually all megacorp, and has been for decades. It's megacorp corruption through the government. Because I spent a lot of time. I was a GP using a GP system, and I couldn't understand why the GP systems, despite being not bad in some respects, they're still quite shit in terms of the things they didn't do, and the things that they made quite difficult. And that started me unraveling who's responsible for this, who are the companies, who oversees this. The answer being not, there isn't really much oversight. RCGP, Health Informatics Group, has some oversight over GP systems. The BMA have some oversight over GP systems, but that's being eroded as we speak. In fact, NHS England are trying to challenge the authority of that committee. But they've got a senior civil servant who thinks that there's no reason why there should be any professional oversight over these things, and that NHS England are absolutely fine to mark their own homework. And as you unravel it, you get to a new level. It's like you complete a level in a game and you beat that boss and you go, still doesn't make any sense though. And it's only in the last year or two, since a lot of other bigger geopolitical things have happened that are also caused by the same thing, that it started to fall into place. And actually, weird as it might sound and sad as it might sound, because it means that we can't solve it with like grassroots NHS hard graft. This is a bigger picture thing. This is about wealth inequality. It's about corruption, and it's about regulatory capture. And those things are also the reason why housing is fucked and council tax is so expensive, and yet streets are full of litter, and so much is explained by the same phenomena. So we're not unique. It isn't just if we could try harder and have some standards or sign a Newcastle Declaration, or there are whatever we do inside health tech within ourselves won't make a difference until we tackle the actual sort of original source of the problem, which is vast wealth inequality.
I mean, I look back at the Newcastle Declaration now with both pride and shame, I'm proud that we tried to do something, but shame that we'd so overestimated our own voice in these matters, because it made not a blind bit of difference. The fact
No.
that we all knew that interoperability was the right thing to do didn't make not a jot of difference to the supplier community. And indeed, the consolidation into the hands of a very few people has just carried on. And eventually we'll get Larry Ellison's vision of interoperability is that everything's running on Larry Ellison's software.
Yeah. Where we're
Ta-da!
going, we won't need interoperability because everything will be running on the same platform.
Well, exactly so. That's exactly where we're headed to, and then we get to pay through the nose for all eternity. I'm reminded of um, you know, big pharma back in the 80s when I was a boy doctor. Um, they would take you and your wife for a spin round the Bay of Biscay on Concorde or the QE2 if you'd prescribe more new sleeping tablets or whatever. And eventually, people got annoyed enough about that to go, "Do you know what? This is bent, and we're going to have to do something about it." So now you can't even get a sandwich off a drug rep, and rightly so. That's how it ought to be. But I don't think we've reached that point with the health software business. I still think there's a lot of sharp practice around regulatory recapture. And to be fair to some of the smaller outfits, some of the decent British SMEs and bigger actually. I work for the Access Group who are not trying to gouge people's eyes out and are paying their taxes in the UK and are trying to deliver half decent software at a price the NHS can afford. Um, they're the people who are really going to suffer when all the regulators are captured, when all the politicians are on board. Um, and we're shooting ourselves in the foot by handing it all off to. I imagine some of these big companies have a regulatory capture department. They won't call it that, but I'm pretty much sure that there'd be a wing of their sales organisation whose specific job it is to capture regulators and politicians.
Tony Blair Institute, don't they? That's what you do.
Yeah.
Is pay an external think tank to pretend to be a representative of the general population, but in fact, it's very specifically paid for and owned by their sponsors. And there's a really interesting chat between George Monbiot and I've forgotten the other guy. I'll put the link in the chat.
The people from Democracy for Sale have
Peter Judgegum.
put it all out there. But I feel like I'm some sort of mad conspiracy theorist. But the trail, they say, don't they, follow the money, and the trail of money in this instance is, well, it's hiding in plain sight, isn't it? Like Jimmy Savile.
Yeah, and once you get to understand that that's the cause of all the illogical decisions that are made by the powerful centre of the NHS, it takes the pressure off, because you realise that there's nothing we can do until that is fixed. There's no point me trying to use my tiny lobbying position within the profession to try and argue for clinical standards within software, common user interfaces, and improvements that would actually make benefits directly for patients and directly for the users of the software, because that's not going to happen. Because you've got to see who's going to benefit, where is the money going, and if there isn't a top line sponsor for it, they're not interested. I mean, when I look back at NHS Ubuntu as a project, which it's very difficult to understand why that wasn't taken up at all and supported, because it was essentially a free alternative operating system. We did an episode about it a couple of weeks ago. But it was being used essentially as a little negotiating piece with Microsoft. But Microsoft were always, they were always going to get their money. And we were used a little bit. And then as soon as we weren't needed anymore, we were cast aside. And Microsoft will remain and do remain central to the NHS's computing at a huge cost, and we still don't have an alternative. Whereas at least if we'd have built that slowly, we've had an alternative. I ask myself sometimes, why did nobody, not a single person with a checkbook, think, oh, this would be an interesting thing to, as a plan B, we just give 0.1% of the money that's going to Microsoft. Let's nurture this and see if it becomes something worthwhile. Because in all other human endeavor, you have to start some ideas off as a little an incubator, don't you? They don't all come out. The Apollo moon landings had to be funded. Somebody had to come up with the idea and make it happen. If you want big things, they've got to happen. Why was there nobody prepared to do that? And I think that, the answer is follow the money. The
other thing, it's the zeros, Marcus, that I think people need to get sensible about. So, roughly 1 million staff working in the NHS. So if you see a contract for, let's say, electronic staff records, which was, I don't know, 1.2 billion. So you divide that by 1 million, and the number you come up with is 1,200. So £1,200 for everybody's electronics per member of staff.
Yeah.
Now there's at least 2 noughts too many there. How can they not see it in Whitehall that there's too many noughts in that development, especially when everything don't need the floppy disks anymore, not buying any magnetic disks, no, nuclear powered software. They don't need a titanium heat shield. It's software. For God's sake, have a look at where they put the decimal point in the bid, and they normally put it where we tell them to put it. So if you ask them for a federated data platform and say you've got £500 million to spend, guess what it'll cost? £500 million.
And the rest, because it'll always, there's the contract overrun, and there's the buying it in again. So
it's all in here. Take 2 noughts off everything. Invest in the British software industry and stop being taken in by the madness that comes out of Vegas and $400 stakes.
I think that's a great line on which to end. I think brilliant work there with the book. I've read a lot of the book as it went along, as those were published.
Yeah.
But it's really nice to see them all brought together in a collection, and hopefully people will read it and learn the lessons. As you say, it's the story of an unraveling naivety that's eventually the scales are lifted and you realize where you are.
Exactly. Unraveling naivety. That would have been a better title than FHIR and Loathing in Las Vegas, Frank.
I love the title. Anyway, Joe McDonald, thanks for coming on. I'll put links to to buy the book. I'll put links to anything we've talked about, and some follow-on reading and that sort of thing. So see you in the next one.
All right. Thanks, Marcus.
Bye now.